The notification sound from my phone made my heart skip a beat. I glanced at the screen and saw it. Another payment notification from YouTube. $847,329.12. For the month of October alone. I stared at the number, remembering how just 18 months ago, my own brother had called my channel the most embarrassing thing our family has ever been associated with. Now that same brother was texting me every week asking for business advice. But let me start from the beginning, because this story isn't just about money. It's about what happens when the people closest to you become your biggest obstacles, and how sometimes the thing everyone calls your biggest mistake becomes your greatest triumph. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Jessica Martinez, and in January 2023, I was a 28-year-old insurance adjuster living in Phoenix, Arizona. I had what everyone considered a respectable job, a decent apartment, and absolutely zero excitement in my life. Every day felt like a carbon copy of the last. Wake up at 6:30, drive to the office, process claims, drive home, watch Netflix, sleep, repeat. The only thing that brought me genuine joy was something I'd been doing since college, creating miniature food. Not cooking regular food, making tiny, incredibly detailed replicas of meals using polymer clay, resin, and various crafting materials. I'd spent hours in my spare bedroom crafting microscopic pizzas with individual pepperoni slices, miniature sushi rolls with perfectly formed rice grains, and elaborate wedding cakes that could fit on a quarter. Most people thought it was weird. My family thought it was a waste of time. But for me, it was meditation, art, and pure creative satisfaction rolled into one. The idea to start a YouTube channel came to me during a particularly soul-crushing day at work. I just spent 8 hours dealing with angry customers whose claims had been denied, and I came home feeling completely drained. As I sat in my craft room working on a tiny Thanksgiving dinner complete with a turkey the size of a grape, I thought about how this was the only time I felt truly alive. I'd watched enough YouTube to know that people made channels about everything. There were channels dedicated to soap cutting, paint mixing, and people eating massive quantities of food. Surely there was an audience for miniature food creation, right? My first video was uploaded on February 14th, 2023. I called the channel Tiny Taste. The video was me making a miniature Valentine's Day dinner, a complete meal with tiny steaks, microscopic vegetables, and wine glasses filled with red resin. The production quality was terrible. I filmed it with my iPhone propped up on a stack of books, the lighting was harsh and uneven, and I was so nervous that my voice shook throughout the entire 15-minute tutorial. The video got 37 views. 37! And most of those were probably from me checking to make sure it had uploaded properly. But something about hitting that publish button felt revolutionary. For the first time in years, I'd put something I cared about out into the world. I didn't tell my family about the channel initially. I knew they wouldn't understand. My parents, Maria and Robert Martinez, were both practical people who'd worked blue-collar jobs their entire lives. My dad was a mechanic, my mom worked at the local elementary school cafeteria. They'd sacrificed a lot to help me get through college and land my insurance job, and I knew they saw my crafting as a frivolous hobby that took time away from advancing my career. My older brother, David, was even worse. He was a successful real estate agent who drove a BMW and constantly posted on Facebook about his latest sales achievements. David had opinions about everything, and most of those opinions involved telling other people how they were wasting their potential. For the first 3 months, I uploaded videos twice a week. I made miniature birthday parties, tiny picnics, microscopic fast food meals. I slowly figured out better lighting, invested in a decent camera, and started writing scripts instead of just rambling nervously. My subscriber count grew slowly. By May, I had 1,200 subscribers. The comments were incredible. People from all over the world were finding genuine joy and relaxation in watching me create these tiny worlds. Someone from Japan said my videos helped them fall asleep. A woman from Germany commented that she'd started making miniature food with her daughter because of my tutorials. A teenager from Ohio said my channel was the highlight of her week. But the real world felt different. At my day job, I was constantly distracted, thinking about ideas for new videos. I'd find myself sketching tiny food designs during meetings and researching new crafting techniques during my lunch breaks. My supervisor, Janet, had started making comments about my decreased focus and productivity. The breaking point came in late May during the family barbecue at my parents' house. I was sitting at the picnic table working on a miniature barbecue scene: tiny burgers, microscopic corn on the cob, even little condiment bottles. I was filming the process with my phone, planning to use the footage for a behind-the-scenes video. David walked over and saw what I was doing. "Seriously, Jess? You're making toy food at a family gathering?" "It's not toy food," I said, not looking up from the tiny spatula I was crafting. "It's miniature art, and I'm building something with it." "Building what? A hobby that costs you money and time you don't have?" I looked up at him. "Actually, I'm building a YouTube channel. I have over 1,000 subscribers now." David laughed. Not a kind laugh, but the sharp, dismissive laugh he'd perfected since we were kids. 1,000 subscribers? Jess, people with real jobs don't play with dollhouse food and call it a business. The conversation caught my parents' attention. "What's this about YouTube?" my mom asked, walking over with a plate of actual burgers. David jumped in before I could answer. "Jess thinks she's going to make money playing with tiny fake food on the internet." My dad set down his beer and looked at me seriously. "Jessica, please tell me you're not considering leaving your job for this." "I'm not leaving my job," I said, feeling defensive. "I'm just exploring other interests." "Other interests?" David scoffed. "This isn't pottery class, Jess. You're a grown woman, posting videos of yourself playing with toys. Do you know how that looks?" "It looks like I'm creating something people enjoy," I said, my voice getting louder. "I have viewers from 20 different countries, people who look forward to my videos every week." My mom sat down across from me, her face full of concern. "Sweetheart, we just worry about you. You have a good job, steady income, and benefits. These internet things, they're not reliable." "And frankly," David added, "it's embarrassing. My clients ask me about my family, and I have to explain that my sister makes dollhouse food videos. Do you know how that reflects on all of us?" The words hit me like a physical blow. Embarrassing. That's what my passion project was to them. Not creative, not entrepreneurial, not even just harmless fun. Embarrassing. I packed up my miniature barbecue scene and left the party without saying goodbye. That night, I seriously considered deleting my channel. I sat in my craft room surrounded by tiny creations that had brought me so much joy, and all I could hear was David's voice calling it embarrassing. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was deluding myself into thinking this could be anything more than a weird hobby. But then I opened my laptop and saw the comments on my latest video. A woman named Sarah had written a paragraph about how watching my videos helped her deal with anxiety. A man named Carlos said he'd started a miniature food collection because of my tutorials and was bonding with his daughter over it. A teenager named Emma said my channel inspired her to pursue art school. These people didn't think I was embarrassed. They thought I was creating something valuable. I made a decision that night. Instead of deleting my channel, I was going to double down on it. If my family couldn't see the potential in what I was building, I'd prove them wrong. I started researching everything I could about growing a YouTube channel. I learned about SEO optimization, thumbnail design, and audience engagement. I studied successful creators in adjacent niches, art channels, ASMR creators, and tutorial-focused content. I invested in better equipment, spending nearly $3,000 on a professional camera setup, studio lighting, and high-quality crafting materials. Most importantly, I started treating my channel like a business instead of just a hobby. I created content calendars, planned series of related videos, and began engaging more actively with my community. I started a Patreon account where subscribers could get early access to videos and downloadable templates for their own miniature food projects. By August 2023, my channel had grown to 25,000 subscribers. My videos were getting hundreds of thousands of views, and I was making about $1,200 a month from ad revenue and Patreon subscriptions. It wasn't enough to quit my day job, but it was real money. Money I was earning by doing something I loved. But my family's attitude hadn't changed. If anything, they seemed more concerned. During a phone call with my mom in late August, she brought up my internet hobby again. Jessica, I've been thinking about what you said at the barbecue, about having viewers and making some money. I just want you to be realistic about this. What do you mean? I asked. Well, even if you're making a little money now, these internet fads don't last. Remember when David tried to flip houses during the real estate boom? He thought that was going to make him rich too. The comparison stung because it was so dismissive. David's house flipping venture had been a legitimate business attempt during a favorable market. My YouTube channel was being compared to a failed get-rich-quick scheme? Mom, this isn't a fad. People have been making careers on YouTube for over a decade now. Some creators make millions of dollars. Some people win the lottery too, sweetheart, but you can't plan your life around winning the lottery. After I hung up, I felt more determined than ever. My family saw my channel as a distraction, a phase, or at worst, an embarrassment. But I could see the trajectory I was on. My subscriber count was growing exponentially, my engagement rates were excellent, and I was getting inquiries from brands about potential sponsorship deals. In September, everything started accelerating. A video I made creating a miniature Thanksgiving feast went viral, gaining over 2 million views in its first week. My subscriber count jumped from 25,000 to 180,000 in a matter of days. Suddenly, companies were reaching out offering significant sponsorship deals, and my monthly revenue shot up to $8,500. But the real breakthrough came in October when I received an email that changed everything. A major streaming platform wanted to license some of my content for a new show about unique artists. They were offering $50,000 upfront plus ongoing royalties. The same week, a major craft supply company offered me a 6-month sponsorship deal worth $75,000. And a publisher reached out about turning my miniature food tutorials into a coffee table book. By the end of October 2023, I had made more money in 1 month than I made in 6 months at my insurance job. The YouTube payment notification that month showed $847,329.12. I stared at that number for a long time before screenshotting it. Not because I wanted to brag, but because I needed proof that this was real, that the thing my family called embarrassing had just made me more money than they earned in years of respectable work. The notification sound still gives me chills, but now for a completely different reason. It's not just money, it's vindication. It's proof that sometimes the people who love you most can be completely wrong about what you're capable of achieving. But this story isn't over, because making $800K in a month is just the beginning of what happened when my embarrassing YouTube channel became impossible for my family to ignore. The first thing I did with that October payment wasn't what you might expect. I didn't buy a car or book a vacation. I sat in my cramped craft room and looked around at the setup that had generated nearly $1 million in a single month. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was making more money than most CEOs while working in a space smaller than my parents' walk-in closet. I knew I needed to make some serious changes, but I also knew I couldn't tell my family about the money yet. They'd either think I was lying or assume it was some kind of internet scam. So I started making moves quietly. First, I gave my 2 weeks' notice at the insurance company. Janet, my supervisor, was shocked. Jessica, you're throwing away a stable career for what? Internet videos? I'm pursuing other opportunities, I said, keeping it vague. Other opportunities don't come with health insurance and a 401k, she replied. I hope you know what you're doing. Everyone at work had the same reaction, concern mixed with judgment. To them, I was making a massive mistake, walking away from security for something frivolous and unreliable. Next, I started looking for a proper studio space. I found a 2,000-square-foot warehouse in Scottsdale that was perfect, high ceilings, excellent natural light, and enough room to create elaborate miniature sets. The rent was $4,500 a month, which would have been unthinkable just 6 months earlier.
Setting up the new studio was like entering a different world. I invested in professional-grade equipment, multiple camera angles, automated lighting systems, and a crafting setup that would make any artist jealous. I hired my first employee, a video editor named Marcus, who specialized in close-up detail work. The kind of precision editing my miniature food videos required wasn't something I could keep doing myself while also managing sponsorships and creating content. The transformation was immediate. My production quality skyrocketed, and with it, my viewership. November brought in $1.2 million. December hit $1.8 million. But the isolation was getting to me. Success without anyone to share it with felt hollow. My family still thought I was unemployed and playing with toys, and I was starting to realize that hiding my success was becoming its own kind of prison. The breaking point came during Christmas dinner at my parents' house. I'd been dreading this gathering for weeks, knowing the conversation would inevitably turn to my situation. My cousin Rachel was there with her husband and 2 kids. Rachel worked as a nurse and had always been the responsible one in the family. She pulled me aside in the kitchen while everyone was watching football. "Jess, I'm worried about you," she said quietly. "Mom says you quit your job to make internet videos. That's really concerning." "I'm doing fine, Rachel. Better than fine, actually." "Are you, though? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're throwing away everything you worked for in college. And for what? How much money could you possibly be making from this?" This was my moment. I could have told her right there that I'd made more in the past 3 months than she made in 3 years. But something held me back. Maybe it was fear that she wouldn't believe me, or maybe it was the realization that the money wasn't really the point anymore. The point was that my own family couldn't see value in something that brought joy to hundreds of thousands of people worldwide. "Enough to support myself," I said simply.
Rachel looked skeptical. Jess, I love you, but you need to be realistic. These internet things don't last. What happens when people get bored of watching you make tiny food? What's your backup plan? Before I could answer, David walked into the kitchen. He'd obviously been listening. "She doesn't have a backup plan," he said. "That's the problem. Jess is living in a fantasy where she thinks she's going to get rich and famous making dollhouse accessories." "They're not dollhouse accessories," I said, feeling the familiar frustration rising. "And I'm not trying to get famous. I'm building a business." David laughed that dismissive laugh again. "A business? Jess, businesses have business plans, revenue projections, employee handbooks. You have a hobby that makes beer money. You don't know what you're talking about. I know that you quit a good job with benefits to make videos that 12-year-olds watch on their phones. I know that instead of building equity in real estate or contributing to a retirement fund, you're spending your savings on craft supplies." The conversation was attracting attention from the living room. My parents appeared in the doorway, followed by Rachel's husband and kids. "What's all the shouting about?" my dad asked. "David's just giving me career advice," I said, my voice tight with anger. "Someone needs to," David replied, "because clearly no one else is willing to tell you the truth. You're 28 years old, Jessica. This isn't the time for artistic experiments. This is the time to be building something real." My mom stepped forward. "Sweetheart, we're not trying to hurt your feelings. We just want you to be secure. We want you to have what we couldn't give you, a stable future." "And what if I told you I already have that?" I asked. David scoffed. "Making what, a couple $100 a month? That's not stability, that's a side hustle." I pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking, but I opened my banking app and turned the screen toward them. The account balance showed $3,847,329.12. The kitchen went completely silent. Rachel was the first to speak. That can't be real." David grabbed the phone from my hands and stared at the screen. "This is fake. There's no way." "It's not fake," I said quietly. "That's 3 months of earnings from my embarrassing little YouTube channel." My dad sat down heavily in one of the kitchen chairs. My mom was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. $3.8 million? David read slowly. "In 3 months? From making tiny food," I confirmed.
The questions came all at once. How was this possible? What did I actually do? Was it legal? Was it sustainable? I spent the next hour explaining my business model. The ad revenue from YouTube was just the beginning. Brand sponsorships brought in 6 figures per deal. Licensing agreements with streaming platforms and publishers added another revenue stream. I'd launched a line of miniature food-making kits that were selling thousands of units per week. I was developing an online course that already had a waiting list of 15,000 people. But it's still just making tiny food, Rachel said, though her tone had completely changed. No, I said, it's entertainment, education, art therapy, and community building. My videos help people relax, learn new skills, and connect with others who share their interests. I get messages from teachers using my content in art classes, from therapists recommending my videos to anxious patients, from parents who craft with their kids because of my tutorials. David was quiet for a long time, still holding my phone. Finally, he looked up at me. I owe you an apology. You owe me several apologies, I said. You're right, I was completely wrong about this. About you. I thought you were just avoiding responsibility, avoiding growing up. But you built something incredible. My parents were struggling to process everything. My mom kept asking if I was sure the money was real, if I was sure it would keep coming, if I was sure this wasn't some kind of mistake that would be corrected later. But my dad surprised me. He was quiet through most of the conversation, but as everyone was preparing to leave, he pulled me aside. Jessica, I want you to know something. Even if you weren't making all this money, what you're doing has value. I didn't understand it before, but I watched some of your videos after the barbecue incident. The comments from your viewers, those people genuinely care about what you create. That's not nothing, that's special. It was the first time any of my family members had acknowledged that my work might have worth beyond its financial success. The drive home that night felt surreal. 3 years of hiding, justifying, and defending my passion, and it all changed in the span of one conversation. But the validation felt bittersweet. I was relieved that they finally understood, but I was also angry that it had taken millions of dollars for them to see value in what I was doing.
The real test would be whether their newfound respect was genuine or just based on the money. Over the next few weeks, I got my answer. David started calling me regularly, asking for business advice and investment tips. He wanted to know if I needed help managing my money, if I was interested in real estate investments, if I wanted to diversify my portfolio. The brother who had called my work embarrassing was now treating me like a business mentor. My parents were proud, but in a way that felt performative. Suddenly, they were mentioning my YouTube channel to their friends, talking about their daughter, the internet entrepreneur. My mom started sharing my videos on Facebook with captions like, "So proud of my talented daughter." It was gratifying, but it also highlighted how conditional their support had always been. When they thought I was making a mistake, they were embarrassed. When they realized I was making money, they were proud. The actual work, the creativity, the community I'd built, none of that seemed to matter as much as the financial validation. But there were genuine moments too. My dad started watching every single video I posted and would text me detailed feedback. Rachel signed up for my online course and started making miniature food with her kids. Even David, for all his newfound interest in my business success, admitted that he found my videos relaxing and had started recommending them to his stressed-out clients. The family dynamic had shifted permanently. I was no longer the irresponsible younger sister pursuing a frivolous hobby. I was Jessica Martinez, successful entrepreneur and YouTube creator. It felt good, but it also felt complicated. Because the truth is, the money was just the byproduct. The real success was the community I'd built, the joy I'd created, and the fact that I'd found a way to make a living doing something I genuinely loved. The financial validation was nice, but it shouldn't have been necessary for my family to respect my choices. Still, I couldn't deny that having their support made everything better. For the first time since starting my channel, I felt like I could fully embrace my success without having to justify or hide it. And that confidence was about to take my business to levels I'd never imagined possible. January 2024 brought opportunities I never could have anticipated. The success of my Christmas revelation had given me a new kind of confidence, and I decided it was time to think bigger than just YouTube videos. The first major expansion came from an unexpected source. Netflix reached out through my business manager. Yes, I now had a business manager, with a proposal that made me sit down and read the email 3 times. They wanted to create a limited series called Miniature Worlds, featuring different artists who created small-scale masterpieces. I would be the centerpiece of the first episode, with a guaranteed payment of $500,000 plus residuals. But it wasn't just about showcasing my existing work. They wanted me to create something entirely new, a miniature restaurant, complete with tiny diners, working miniature kitchen equipment, and food so detailed it would require macro lenses to capture properly. The project would take 3 months and would be filmed documentary style, showing the entire creation process. I said yes immediately. The Netflix project introduced me to a level of pressure I'd never experienced. Suddenly, I wasn't just creating content for YouTube viewers who appreciated my work. I was creating for television audiences who might be encountering miniature art for the first time. The stakes felt enormous. I chose to recreate Tavern on the Green in New York City, complete with its famous crystal chandeliers and elaborate dining rooms. But in miniature, every detail had to be perfect. Each tiny light bulb had to actually work. The miniature wine glasses had to be filled with realistic liquid. The food on each plate had to look fresh and appealing even under extreme close-up scrutiny. The production crew followed me everywhere for 3 months. They filmed me mixing custom paint colors to match the restaurant's exact wallpaper, crafting individual miniature wine bottles with working corks, and creating a functioning miniature kitchen where I could actually cook tiny portions of real food. The most challenging part was the dining room scene. I created 40 individual miniature diners, each with their own personality, outfit, and meal. One table had a tiny couple celebrating an anniversary with a cake smaller than a dime, but decorated with roses I painted using a single hair brush. Another table featured a business meeting with miniature laptops that actually opened and tiny documents with readable text. During filming, something interesting happened with my regular YouTube content. Instead of the Netflix project competing with my channel, it elevated everything. My behind-the-scenes videos from the Netflix shoot started getting record viewership. People were fascinated not just by the final miniature creations, but by the process of working under television pressure. March earnings hit $2.3 million. The Netflix episode aired in May 2024, and everything exploded. Miniature Worlds became one of their top-performing limited series. Suddenly, I was being invited to talk shows, art exhibitions, and museum collaborations. The Smithsonian reached out about commissioning a miniature American history series. Disney wanted me to create miniature versions of their theme park attractions. But the most surreal moment came when I received a call from my old supervisor, Janet, at the insurance company. "Jessica, this is Janet Morrison from Pinnacle Insurance. I hope you remember me." "Of course, Janet. How are you?" "Well, I'm calling because I just watched your Netflix show, and I wanted to apologize. When you quit, I thought you were making a terrible mistake. I had no idea you were building something like this." She paused, and I could hear genuine regret in her voice. "I also wanted to ask if you might be interested in coming back to speak to our team about entrepreneurship and taking risks. We'd pay your speaking fee, of course." The irony was overwhelming. The company that had thought I was throwing away my future now wanted to pay me to inspire their current employees to take similar risks. "Janet, I appreciate the call, but I don't think that would be appropriate. You might want to focus on recognizing the potential in your current employees before they feel the need to leave." After I hung up, I realized how much my perspective on success had evolved. It wasn't just about proving my family wrong anymore. It was about understanding that sometimes the people in positions to support your dreams are the least equipped to recognize their value. The Netflix success opened doors I hadn't even known existed. Fashion Week in Paris invited me to create miniature versions of haute couture outfits. The Vatican commissioned a miniature replica of the Sistine Chapel ceiling. A luxury hotel chain wanted miniature versions of their most famous properties for their lobbies. But the project that excited me most was a collaboration with children's hospitals. Medical research had shown that watching detailed, methodical, creative processes helped reduce anxiety in young patients. Several hospitals wanted custom, miniature worlds that could be displayed in pediatric wings, giving kids something beautiful and intricate to focus on during treatment. The first hospital installation was at Phoenix Children's Hospital, my hometown hospital, where I'd been treated for a broken arm as a kid. I created a miniature fairy tale village with working streetlights, tiny shops with miniature merchandise, and even a miniature hospital where fairy tale characters could receive care. Every detail was designed to spark imagination and provide hours of discovery for young patients. When they unveiled it, I watched kids immediately gravitate toward the display, pointing out tiny details, making up stories about the miniature residents, and asking their parents endless questions about how everything was made. One little girl with cancer asked her mom if she could learn to make tiny food like me when she got better. That moment taught me something profound about success. The money was incredible, the recognition was gratifying, but the real impact was in those connections, with viewers who found peace in my videos, with families who bonded over miniature crafts, with sick children who found joy in tiny worlds. My family had finally come to understand this too. David started bringing his kids to my studio, and they'd spend hours helping me craft miniature accessories for upcoming videos. My parents became my biggest promoters, not because of the money, but because they could see the genuine happiness my work brought to people. My dad, who had spent his whole life working with his hands fixing cars, started understanding my craft as another form of skilled manual labor. "You're an artist," he told me one day, while watching me paint a miniature portrait the size of a postage stamp. "I never understood that before, but you're creating things that didn't exist before you made them. That's what artists do." By summer 2024, Tiny Taste had 8.7 million subscribers. My monthly earnings consistently exceeded $2 million. I'd hired a team of 12 people, including video editors, social media managers, a business manager, and even a miniature food assistant who helped with the most detailed work. But the growth wasn't slowing down. If anything, it was accelerating. Major brands were offering sponsorship deals worth 7 figures. Publishers were bidding against each other for the rights to my coffee table book. A theme park wanted to build a full-scale attraction based on my miniature worlds. The little craft room where I'd started 18 months earlier felt like a different lifetime. I was operating a multimedia company with multiple revenue streams, international clients, and enough demand to book projects 2 years in advance. Yet every evening, I still spent time in my personal craft space at home, working on miniature projects just for myself. No cameras, no deadlines, no business considerations. Just me creating tiny worlds because I loved the process. Those quiet moments reminded me why I'd started this journey. Before the money, before the recognition, before my family's validation, there had been something pure about the joy of creating detailed, beautiful things with my hands. Success hadn't changed that fundamental satisfaction. It had just given me the resources and platform to share it with the world. But the biggest changes were still ahead, because everything I'd accomplished so far was just the foundation for what would become the most ambitious project of my career. September 2024 brought a phone call that would change everything. I was in my studio working on a miniature replica of the International Space Station, a commission from NASA for their visitor center, when my business manager Patricia called with news that made me stop mid-brushstroke. "Jessica, you need to sit down for this one. I just got off the phone with representatives from the Louvre Museum in Paris." The Louvre wanted to commission the most ambitious miniature project ever attempted. They were planning a special exhibition called Worlds Within Worlds and wanted me to create a miniature version of the entire Louvre Museum, complete with working galleries, tiny masterpiece paintings, and miniature visitors viewing miniature art. The timeline was 8 months, and the commission was $3.2 million. But there was more. They wanted the project to be fully interactive. Visitors to the exhibition could use magnifying equipment to explore different sections, and certain rooms would feature video screens showing the creation process. It would be part art installation, part documentary, and part technical marvel. I said yes before Patricia finished explaining the details. The Louvre project required me to assemble a team unlike anything I'd ever managed. I hired specialist painters who could recreate famous artworks on surfaces smaller than a fingernail.
I brought in architectural consultants who understood the museum's layout down to the millimeter. I even hired a French cultural historian to ensure every detail was historically accurate. The most complex challenge was scale. The finished miniature Louvre would be 12 feet by 8 feet, enormous by my standards, but requiring each individual element to be incredibly small. The miniature Mona Lisa would be painted on a surface smaller than a grain of rice, but it needed to be photographically perfect when viewed under magnification. While I was planning the Louvre project, something unexpected happened with my YouTube channel. My subscriber count hit 12 million, making Tiny Taste one of the fastest-growing educational channels on the platform. YouTube offered me an exclusive content deal worth $8 million annually, guaranteeing me their highest tier of promotional support. The deal meant I could create whatever content I wanted without worrying about algorithm changes or ad revenue fluctuations. It was creative freedom backed by financial security that most artists never experience. October earnings were $4.1 million, my highest month yet. But success at this level brought challenges I hadn't anticipated. The miniature food community that had supported me from the beginning was evolving. Other creators were starting their own channels, some directly copying my techniques and video formats. A few even used similar thumbnail styles and titles, clearly trying to capitalize on my success. Initially, this bothered me. I'd spent years developing my techniques and building my audience, and now others were essentially copying my homework. But my perspective shifted when I received a message from a creator named Amy Peterson in Seattle. Amy had started her own miniature food channel after watching my videos for 2 years. But instead of copying her, she was focusing on miniature baking specifically. Tiny wedding cakes, microscopic pastries, miniature bread loaves that actually rose during baking. Her work was incredible and completely original. "Jessica," she wrote, "I wanted to thank you for creating space for this kind of art on YouTube. Before your channel, I thought miniature food was too niche for anyone to care about. You proved that people hunger for this kind of detailed, meditative content. You didn't just build a business, you built a community and an entire genre." That message made me realize something important. My success has created opportunities for other artists, not just competition. The miniature art community on YouTube was thriving because I'd proven there was an audience for this work. I decided to lean into this. Instead of viewing other creators as competitors, I started collaborating with them. I created a series called Miniature Masters, where I featured different artists each month, teaching their specialized techniques to my audience. Amy's miniature baking episode got 8.3 million views and helped her channel grow to 500,000 subscribers in 3 weeks. The collaborative approach transformed the entire miniature art space on YouTube. Instead of creators competing for a limited audience, we were expanding the audience together. Viewers who discovered miniature food through my channel were finding Amy's baking videos, Marcus's miniature sculpture work, and Elena's tiny jewelry creations. By November, the miniature art category had become one of YouTube's fastest-growing niches, with over 200 active creators and a combined audience of 50 million subscribers. I wasn't just successful, I'd accidentally created an entire industry. The Louvre project was consuming most of my time, but it was also the most fulfilling work I'd ever done. Every day brought new challenges that pushed my skills to their limits. Creating the miniature version of the Venus de Milo required me to work with materials I'd never used before. The tiny winged Victory of Samothrace needed a special mounting system to capture her dynamic pose at 1/100 scale. The most magical moment came when I was working on the miniature Egyptian antiquities wing. I was crafting a tiny sarcophagus, complete with hieroglyphics smaller than poppy seeds, when I realized I was creating art about art about art. Ancient Egyptian craftsmen had created the original sarcophagus thousands of years ago. The Louvre had preserved and displayed it for generations of visitors. And now I was creating a miniature version that would introduce new audiences to that ancient artistry. There was something profound about that chain of creativity spanning millennia. My family's relationship with my work had evolved completely by this point.
David had become one of my biggest advocates, bringing potential business connections to my studio and helping me negotiate contracts. But more importantly, he'd started understanding the artistic value of what I was doing. During one of his visits, he stood watching me work on a miniature recreation of Delacroix's Liberty Leading the People, each brushstroke requiring a magnifying glass and surgical precision. "You know what I never understood before?" he said quietly. "What?" "I thought making things smaller was somehow less important than making them bigger, like miniature meant diminished. But watching you work, I realize you're not making things smaller, you're concentrating on them. You're taking all the complexity and beauty of something large and distilling it into something that can fit in your palm without losing any of its power." That observation captured something I'd never been able to articulate about my own work. December 2024 brought the completion of the Louvre project's first phase. When I finally stepped back and looked at the entire miniature museum, I felt a sense of accomplishment unlike anything I'd experienced before. It wasn't just the technical achievement or the financial success, it was the realization that I'd created something genuinely unprecedented. The miniature Louvre wasn't just a detailed replica, it was a new way for people to experience art, to see familiar masterpieces from an entirely different perspective. Visitors would be able to explore corners of the museum that are normally crowded or restricted, to see details in famous paintings that are usually viewed from a distance. But the project had also taught me something about the relationship between ambition and satisfaction. The more successful I became, the more complex my projects grew. The Netflix series, the hospital installations, the Louvre commission, each achievement led to bigger opportunities and greater expectations. Sometimes I missed the simplicity of my early videos, when success was measured by positive comments rather than million-dollar contracts. But I also knew that this evolution was natural. Artists grow, audiences evolve, and work becomes more sophisticated over time. The question was no longer whether I could build a successful career around miniature art. I'd already done that beyond my wildest dreams. The question now was what I wanted to do with the platform and resources I'd built. And that decision would shape everything that came next. January 2025 marked exactly 2 years since I'd uploaded my first shaky video of a miniature Valentine's dinner. Looking back at that nervous 28-year-old filming with her iPhone propped on books, I could barely recognize myself. But the transformation I was about to announce would surprise even me. The Louvre exhibition opened to international acclaim. Critics called it revolutionary and a new frontier in interactive art. The New York Times art critic wrote that my miniature museum challenges our fundamental assumptions about scale, accessibility, and the democratization of high culture. Visitors were booking tickets 6 months in advance just to experience the installation. But the real impact became clear when I started receiving letters from unexpected sources. A woman with severe mobility issues wrote that my miniature Louvre allowed her to experience the museum in ways the physical space never could. A teacher from rural Montana explained how she was using high-resolution photos of my work to give her students access to world-class art they'd never see otherwise. A vision-impaired visitor described how the tactile elements I'd incorporated helped him experience famous sculptures for the first time. This feedback crystallized something that had been growing in my mind for months. I wasn't just creating miniature art anymore, I was creating access. My work was breaking down barriers between people and experiences they thought were beyond their reach. That realization led to the biggest decision of my career. In February, I announced the Jessica Martinez Foundation for Accessible Arts. Instead of just creating commissioned pieces for wealthy institutions, I was committing $10 million of my own money to bring miniature art installations to underserved communities worldwide. The first project was a partnership with Title I schools across America. We would create traveling miniature museums that could fit in a single classroom but contain detailed replicas of the world's greatest cultural treasures. Students in rural Kansas could examine the miniature Parthenon with the same level of detail as visitors to Athens. Kids in inner-city Detroit could explore a tiny version of the Palace of Versailles with magnifying equipment that revealed every painted detail. But I didn't want to just drop these installations and leave. Each miniature museum came with a curriculum I'd developed with educational consultants, teaching students about history, geography, and art through hands-on exploration. More importantly, each installation included basic miniature making supplies and instructional materials so students could create their own tiny worlds. The program launched in March with 50 schools. Within the first week, I was receiving videos from teachers showing third graders crafting miniature versions of their own neighborhoods, high schoolers creating tiny replicas of historical scenes they'd studied, and art teachers incorporating miniature techniques into existing curricula. One video particularly moved me. It came from a teacher in Appalachian, West Virginia, where many students had never traveled more than 50 miles from their hometown. She filmed her class examining my miniature recreation of ancient Rome, and you could see the moment when these kids realized that the world was vast and full of wonders they'd never imagined. "Miss Martinez," one 10-year-old said to the camera, "did people really build buildings this big? Can I go see them someday?" That question reminded me why I'd fallen in love with miniature art in the first place. It wasn't about making things smaller. It was about making big dreams feel possible. Meanwhile, my YouTube channel had evolved beyond individual videos into something resembling a television network. I was producing multiple series simultaneously: Miniature Masters, featuring other creators; Tiny Travels, where I recreated famous locations; Historical Miniatures, focusing on different time periods; and Community Builds, where I worked with local artists around the world. My team had grown to 35 people, including researchers, historians, travel coordinators, and educational consultants. We were operating out of a 15,000 square foot facility that looked more like a film studio than a craft workshop. But the most satisfying development was happening at home. My family had become genuine partners in my mission. David was using his business connections to help secure funding for the foundation. My parents had started volunteering at local schools, teaching basic crafting skills to supplement the miniature museum visits. Rachel was developing therapeutic applications for miniature art in hospital settings. The transformation was complete. The family that had once called my passion embarrassing was now actively supporting my mission to share that passion with the world. In April, I received an invitation that felt like the ultimate validation. The United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization wanted me to speak at their annual conference about art's role in global education. They were particularly interested in how miniature art could preserve cultural heritage and make it accessible to communities that couldn't afford to travel to major museums. Standing at that podium, looking out at education ministers and cultural leaders from 150 countries, I thought about that family barbecue where David had dismissed my work as embarrassing. 2 years later, I was being asked to share my expertise with the world's educational leadership. But the most surreal moment came after my presentation. The Minister of Culture from France approached me with a proposal that left me speechless. The French government wanted to commission me to create miniature versions of their most important cultural sites, not just for display, but as permanent installations that could travel to French schools and cultural centers worldwide. The contract was worth $15 million over 3 years. As 2025 progressed, the financial numbers became almost abstract. Monthly YouTube earnings consistently exceeded $5 million. The foundation was generating its own revenue through educational licensing deals. My book advance was $2.3 million. Theme park consulting brought in another 7 figures annually. But the metric that mattered most was impact. By summer 2025, the Foundation's miniature museums had reached over 300,000 students across 6 countries. We trained 1,200 teachers in miniature art techniques. Students from our programs had won national art competitions, been accepted to prestigious art schools, and started their own miniature art clubs. The ripple effects were extraordinary. A high school student in Oklahoma used miniature art techniques to create a scale model that helped her community visualize flood prevention measures. A middle schooler in Philadelphia built a miniature version of her neighborhood that was used in city planning meetings. College students were writing thesis papers on the educational applications of scaled art. I'd accidentally created not just an industry, but a movement. The year's biggest challenge came in August when a major competitor, a large media company, launched their own miniature art channel with a massive marketing budget and production team. They were clearly trying to replicate my success with better resources and celebrity endorsements. Initially, my team was concerned, but I realized something important. What made my channel special wasn't just the production quality or even the miniature art itself. It was the genuine passion, the educational mission, and the community we'd built together. Those things couldn't be replicated with money and marketing. Sure enough, while the competitor's channel gained subscribers quickly, their engagement rates were poor and viewer retention was low. People could tell the difference between content created for profit and content created from passion. By September, my channel had reached 18 million subscribers, and the foundation was operating in 12 countries. But more importantly, I was receiving messages from young artists around the world who were pursuing careers in miniature art, detailed crafting, and accessible education because of the path I'd helped create. As I sit here now, looking at my latest bank statement showing $7.2 million in October earnings, I'm struck not by the number itself, but by what it represents. Every dollar came from someone who found value in what I created, whether it was a YouTube viewer finding relaxation in my videos, a student discovering new worlds through miniature museums, or an institution recognizing the power of art to connect and educate. The girl who once hid her crafting hobby from her family had built something that reached millions of people worldwide. The embarrassing YouTube channel had become a global platform for cultural education and artistic inspiration. But the real victory wasn't financial. It was the realization that when you follow your genuine passion with dedication and integrity, you don't just achieve personal success, you create opportunities for others to discover and pursue their own dreams. And that transformation from family embarrassment to global inspiration had been worth every difficult conversation, every moment of doubt, and every risk along the way. November 2025 brought a phone call that would test everything I thought I knew about success and family loyalty. I was in my studio working on a commission for the Metropolitan Museum when my phone buzzed with a call from my cousin Rachel. "Jess, we need to talk. It's about David." The concern in her voice immediately put me on edge. David had been one of my biggest supporters over the past year, helping coordinate foundation partnerships and even appearing in some of my educational videos. But Rachel's next words hit me like a physical blow. "He's been taking credit for your success. At real estate conferences, with clients, even in interviews with local business magazines. He's calling himself your business mentor and claiming he guided your YouTube strategy from the beginning." I felt sick. After everything we'd been through, after all the growth in our relationship, David was still David, unable to let someone else, especially his little sister, have something he couldn't claim as his own achievement. "How do you know this?" I asked. "Sarah Martinez, you remember, Mom's friend from church? Her son works for that business magazine downtown. He called her asking for David's contact information because they wanted to do a follow-up story about the real story behind Jessica Martinez's success and David's role as her mentor." The betrayal stung worse than his original dismissal ever had. When he'd called my work embarrassing, at least he was being honest about his feelings. This was something else entirely, deliberate deception for personal gain. But before I could process my anger fully, Rachel continued. "There's more. He's been reaching out to your brand sponsors, introducing himself as your business manager. Patricia found out when 3 different companies called her, asking why they were getting conflicting information from your team. This wasn't just betrayal, it was sabotage that could damage relationships I'd spent years building."
I hung up with Rachel and immediately called an emergency meeting with my actual team. Within 2 hours, Patricia, my legal counsel, and my head of communications were gathered in my office trying to assess the potential damage. The good news, Patricia said, is that most of your major partners know who your real representation is. The bad news is that David has been persistent enough that some smaller brands are confused about your business structure. My lawyer was more direct. Jessica, this is fraud. He's misrepresenting himself in ways that could cost you business relationships and damage your reputation. You have grounds for legal action. But legal action against my own brother felt like admitting that our family relationships were fundamentally broken. Despite everything, I still hoped there was a way to handle this within the family. I decided to confront David directly, but I wanted witnesses. I arranged a family dinner at my parents' house and made sure Rachel would be there too. The conversation started normally enough, but I could see David was nervous. He kept checking his phone and seemed distracted when my parents asked about his latest real estate deals. Finally, I brought up what I'd learned. David, I heard you've been telling people you're my business mentor. His face went red immediately. Where did you hear that? Does it matter where I heard it? Is it true? My parents looked confused. What's this about? My mom asked. David has been attending business conferences and giving interviews where he claims he guided my YouTube success from the beginning. He's also been contacting my sponsors, pretending to be part of my management team. The kitchen went silent. My dad set down his coffee cup with a clink that seemed unnaturally loud. David, my father said slowly, please tell me this isn't true. David's defensive walls went up immediately. Look, I've been helping Jessica with business advice. I've introduced her to contacts, helped her think through expansion strategies. Is it so wrong to get some recognition for that? You called my channel embarrassing, I said quietly. You told our entire family I was throwing my life away. You said my work reflected poorly on all of you. And now you're claiming you mentored me? People change, Jess. I came around to support you. Supporting me is different from taking credit for my work. Rachel spoke up. David, you've been telling people you developed Jessica's content strategy. You've been claiming you advised her to focus on miniature food when we all know you mocked that exact choice for months. My mom looked devastated. David, how could you do this after everything Jessica achieved on her own? But David wasn't backing down. You all act like Jessica did this completely alone, like she didn't have any help or support. I've contributed to her success, whether she wants to acknowledge it or not. That statement revealed something I'd been too hopeful to see clearly. David hadn't actually changed his fundamental view of me or my capabilities. He'd just recalibrated his approach when my success became too large to ignore. Rather than acknowledging he'd been wrong about my potential, he'd found a way to insert himself into the narrative as a necessary component of my achievement. What specific contributions are you referring to? I asked. David fumbled for an answer. I've provided business guidance, strategic thinking, network connections. Name one strategic decision I made based on your advice. Silence. Name one network connection that led to a significant opportunity. More silence. David, the truth is, you've attended maybe 6 meetings over the past year, most of which were just you listening to my team present finished strategies. You've provided moral support, which I appreciated, but you haven't shaped any business decisions. My dad looked at David with an expression I'd never seen before. Deep disappointment mixed with something that looked like shame.
Son, your sister built something extraordinary, despite having no support from this family, not because of it. For you to now claim credit for her work, that's not the man I raised you to be. The confrontation ended with David storming out, but not before making it clear that he felt wronged by the family's ingratitude for his contributions. In the days that followed, I had to do something I'd never expected, publicly distance myself from my own brother. My team drafted statements for major partners clarifying my actual business structure and representation. We had to send cease and desist letters preventing David from using my name or claiming association with my work. The situation became public when a local reporter investigating David's claims discovered the family connection and decided to write about the dark side of YouTube success. The article painted a picture of family relationships destroyed by money and fame. Reading that article, I realized something profound about success that no one had prepared me for. The bigger your achievements become, the more people will try to attach themselves to your story, including people you trust most. Success doesn't just change how strangers see you, it reveals things about your closest relationships that were always there, but hidden. But the David situation also clarified something important about my family. My parents and Rachel rallied around me completely, understanding that my success belonged to me and that David's behavior was unacceptable. The crisis actually strengthened my relationships with the family members who mattered most. More importantly, it forced me to establish better boundaries around my business and personal life. I implemented new policies about family involvement in professional matters and created clearer separation between Jessica Martinez the person and Jessica Martinez the brand. December 2025 became a month of reflection and recalibration. My earnings hit an all-time high of $8.9 million for the month, driven by holiday-themed content and year-end brand partnerships. But I found myself less excited about the financial milestones and more focused on the meaningful work. The foundation had reached a significant milestone. Our educational programs were now operating in 500 schools across 15 countries. We'd trained over 2,000 teachers and directly impacted more than 750,000 students. The ripple effects were even larger, with students teaching family members and communities adopting miniature art as cultural preservation tools. A particularly moving example came from a small village in Guatemala where students used miniature art techniques to recreate traditional indigenous crafts that were at risk of being lost. Their work was so detailed and culturally significant that it was acquired by the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian. These stories reminded me why I'd started the foundation in the first place. The money was a byproduct. The real success was creating pathways for people to discover and develop their own creative potential. Looking back on everything that had happened, I realized that my family's initial reaction, calling my work embarrassing, had actually been a gift. Their lack of support forced me to develop independence, self-reliance, and internal motivation that external validation could never provide. If they had been encouraging from the beginning, I might have sought their approval instead of building something truly extraordinary. David's betrayal, painful as it was, had taught me something equally valuable about protecting what you build. Success attracts not just opportunity, but also people who want to claim ownership of your achievements. Learning to recognize and defend against that was just another skill that came with operating at this level. As 2025 came to a close, I was managing a multimedia empire, running a global foundation, and had achieved financial success beyond anything I'd ever imagined. But the real transformation wasn't in my bank account. It was in my understanding of what success actually meant. It wasn't about proving my family wrong or achieving external validation. It was about following genuine passion with unwavering commitment and using whatever platform that created to lift others up along the way. The girl who had once hidden her crafting hobby was now inspiring millions of people worldwide to pursue their own creative dreams, regardless of what others might think. And that transformation, from family embarrassment to global inspiration, had been worth every difficult moment along the way. March 2026 brought an invitation that would define the next chapter of my journey. I was in my studio putting the finishing touches on a miniature recreation of the ancient Library of Alexandria, complete with 40,000 individually crafted scrolls smaller than toothpicks, when Patricia burst through my office door with an expression I'd never seen before. "Jessica, sit down. The call I just took, I'm not sure you're going to believe this. The President of the United States wanted to meet with me, not for a photo opportunity or ceremonial recognition, but for a serious policy discussion about using art and education to bridge cultural divides in America. The administration had been studying my foundation's work and wanted to explore scaling similar programs nationally through the Department of Education. They're talking about a potential $50 million federal initiative," Patricia said, her voice barely containing her excitement. "Using miniature cultural installations to connect rural and urban students to help kids understand different communities and histories through hands-on art." The meeting was scheduled for 2 weeks later in the West Wing.
As I prepared, I kept thinking about that insurance office where I'd processed claims just 3 years ago. If someone had told me then that I'd be discussing national education policy with the president, I'd have assumed they were describing someone else's life. The White House meeting exceeded every expectation. The president had clearly done her homework, asking detailed questions about curriculum integration, teacher training programs, and measurable educational outcomes. But what struck me most was her understanding of the deeper purpose behind my work.
Miss Martinez, she said as we concluded our discussion, what you've created isn't just art education, it's empathy education. When a child in Mississippi creates a miniature version of a Navajo dwelling, or when a student in Vermont crafts a tiny replica of a soul food restaurant, they're not just learning techniques, they're developing understanding. The federal partnership launched in September 2026 with pilot programs in 200 schools across all 50 states. The initiative, called Tiny Bridges, became the largest arts education expansion in decades. My team worked with the Department of Education to train 5,000 teachers in miniature art techniques specifically designed to explore American cultural diversity. But the personal breakthrough came 6 months later, in an unexpected phone call from David. Jess, I need to apologize, really apologize, not just say the words. I'd spoken to my brother only once since the family confrontation, and that conversation had been brief and strained. Hearing genuine remorse in his voice caught me off guard. I've been in therapy, he continued, trying to figure out why I couldn't just be proud of you without making it about me. The therapist helped me understand that your success highlighted everything I thought I should have achieved but didn't. He paused, and I could hear him struggling with the words. When we were kids, I was always the successful one. Better grades, more popular, better at sports. I built my identity around being the achiever in the family. When you started succeeding beyond anything I'd ever accomplished, instead of celebrating that, I felt threatened. So I tried to insert myself into your story to preserve my own sense of worth. This was the first time David had ever spoken to me with complete honesty about his feelings. I know I damaged our relationship, and I know I hurt your business. I'm not asking for forgiveness right away. I just wanted you to understand that my behavior came from my own insecurity, not from any lack of respect for what you built. The conversation lasted 2 hours. For the first time since we were children, David and I talked as equals, not as the successful older brother and the struggling younger sister, but as two adults who'd taken very different paths and were finally mature enough to understand each other's journeys. He didn't ask to be involved in my business again, and I didn't offer. But we began rebuilding a personal relationship based on honesty rather than family obligation or business convenience. Meanwhile, my work was evolving in directions I'd never anticipated. The Smithsonian approached me about a permanent installation, not a temporary exhibition, but a lasting addition to the National Museum of American History. They wanted me to create a miniature timeline of American innovation, showing how creativity and entrepreneurship had shaped the country's development. The project would take 3 years and represent every major technological, artistic, and social breakthrough in American history through detailed miniature scenes. From the first printing press to the development of social media, each era would be represented by tiny, incredibly detailed dioramas that visitors could explore using state-of-the-art magnification technology. But the most personally meaningful project came from an unexpected source. Phoenix Children's Hospital, where I'd installed my first fairy tale village, wanted to expand our partnership. They'd been tracking patient outcomes and discovered that children who spent time with miniature art installations showed measurably reduced anxiety, faster recovery times, and improved treatment compliance. Jessica, Dr. Sarah Chen, the head of pediatric psychology, explained during our meeting, "We want to create the first hospital wing designed entirely around miniature art therapy. Not just displays to look at, but interactive spaces where young patients can create their own miniature worlds while receiving treatment." The wing would feature dedicated crafting spaces where children could work on miniature projects during chemotherapy sessions, recovery periods, and long-term stays. Each patient room would have built-in miniature display cases where kids could showcase their creations,
and the hallways would feature constantly rotating exhibitions of patient artwork. Working on that project reminded me why I'd fallen in love with miniature art in the first place. It wasn't about the scale or the technical challenge, it was about creating something beautiful and meaningful with your hands, something that existed because you chose to make it exist. By early 2027, my monthly earnings had stabilized at around $12 million, a number so large it had lost most of its emotional impact. What mattered more was the ecosystem I'd helped create. The miniature art community on YouTube now includes over 1,000 creators. My foundation was operating in 25 countries, the Federal Education Partnership had reached 2 million students. But the most satisfying measurement was something that couldn't be quantified. I was receiving messages from young adults who said my videos had inspired them to pursue careers in education, art therapy, museum curation, and cultural preservation. People who discovered their life's work because they'd stumbled across a video of someone making tiny food. One message particularly moved me. It came from Elena Rodriguez, a 22-year-old art therapy student in California. Dear Jessica, 5 years ago, I was a depressed teenager who thought art was frivolous and impractical. Then I found your channel and realized that creativity could heal people, educate them, and bring them together. I'm graduating next month with a degree in art therapy, and I've already been hired by a children's hospital to develop their creative therapy programs. You didn't just teach me to make miniature food, you taught me that art matters, that small things can have huge impacts, and that following your passion isn't selfish if you use it to help others. Reading that message, I realized something profound about success and legacy. The money, the recognition, the institutional partnerships, those were all byproducts of the real work. The real work was inspiring people to believe in their own creative potential and giving them tools to express it. As I write this in April 2027, sitting in my home studio, working on a personal project, a miniature replica of that first craft room where I started my YouTube journey, I can't help but smile at how unpredictable life can be. 4 years ago, I was Jessica Martinez, insurance adjuster, hiding my passion from family members who called it embarrassing. Today, I'm Jessica Martinez, artist and educator, whose work reaches millions of people worldwide and whose foundation operates in schools, hospitals, and communities across the globe. But the most important transformation wasn't professional, it was personal. I learned that external validation, whether negative or positive, isn't the measure of your work's worth. The measure is whether you're creating something authentic that serves a purpose beyond yourself. My family's initial embarrassment forced me to develop internal motivation. Their eventual pride felt good, but I didn't need it anymore. David's betrayal taught me to protect what I'd built, but also to extend grace when people showed genuine growth. Success, I've learned, isn't about proving other people wrong. It's about proving to yourself that your dreams are worth pursuing, regardless of what anyone else thinks.
The notification sound still goes off on my phone every month when YouTube processes payments. Last month, it was $11.8 million. But these days, the sound just makes me think about the kids in classrooms around the world who are discovering that they can create something beautiful with their own hands, and the patients in hospitals who are finding peace in the meditative process of crafting tiny worlds. That transformation, from family embarrassment to global inspiration, taught me the most valuable lesson of all. When you follow your authentic passion with dedication and integrity, you don't just achieve personal success. You create pathways for others to discover and pursue their own dreams. And that's a legacy worth building, one tiny creation at a time. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.